starts off in Argentina. Stephen, the president coming up with a new plan for dealing with debts.
Yes, that's right. Back in July, Argentina had missed a payment to bondholders, those bondholders who had accepted a haircut on their debts in the wake of the country's financial crisis. Now, this happened because of a court ruling in the United States that ordered Buenos Aires to pay a different group of investors, holdout investors as they were known, $1.5 billion. That's before it paid the other creditors. The government has so far refused to do that, and that pushed it into default for the second time in 13 years. Now, in an effort to restart payments to that majority of bondholders, President Cristina Fernandez has now offered to swap their bonds, which are governed by American law, for new ones that are issued under Argentinian law. She says the government will set aside money to pay those bonds even before the creditors sign up to them.
To demonstrate our goodwill and ability to pay, we'll deposit the money, even without them asking for the exchange, so it's at their disposition whenever they decide to do it. We can then emit the bonds for whatever corresponds to the interests of the other creditors as well.
Let's take a look now what's happening on the markets. And despite a positive finish on Wall Street overnight, it's a mixed picture in Asia today in trading. In Japan, markets there digesting the news that the trade deficit had shrunk 6.6% year on year in July. That's down to a rise in exports. You can see just the Kospi and Seoul there nudging into the red.
Well, let's take a look from share prices to the oil price.
Yes, and oil prices, as we know, tend to react to political tensions in certain parts of the world, but the recent violence in Iraq hasn't caused the usual movement on the markets. Crude oil prices have actually remained quite stable, which is good news for consumers. Delano de Souza explains why.
Reasonable gas prices despite rising global tensions. Over the past 3 months, the price of NYMEX crude has remained relatively stable, and it's now currently well below the $100 mark.
We have a supply of oil that's greater than the demand. Why? Because there's less and less demand for oil because there's less growth in the world. So finally, it's this difference between the supply and demand that seems to absorb all the geopolitical tensions which we see in Iraq. And that's why the price per barrel hasn't spiked.
The increase in supply is also due to the United States reducing its dependence on oil-producing Gulf states through fracking.
They import less oil, so when they do this, the markets are relatively confident.
Yet, in spite of stable oil prices, not all consumers are happy with the price they have to pay.
Apparently it's gone down a little bit, but it's still expensive. I think it's always expensive.
I guess if you look at what's going on in the world, you can see that it could be a lot higher.
For now in Iraq, the key oil-producing sites are not located near the conflict zone, a fact that so far kept the oil markets calm.
Now, the quick look at some of the day's companies' news, and more than 2,400 former bankers at Lehman Brothers have won a legal battle to have their pensions paid in full. The former staff, all based in Britain, will receive a total of $306 million from the collapsed bank. The deal was negotiated by the UK's pensions regulator. Heinz has recalled certain batches of baby food in China after it was found to contain excessive amounts of lead. It comes after an investigation by authorities in the eastern Xinjiang province. The company says the issue is limited to a small number of batches sold in that region. And a former advisor to Barack Obama's presidential campaign has joined the private car service app Uber. David Plouffe will become head of policy and strategy at the company next month. He'll be leading the regulatory battles Uber's facing in cities from Washington to Paris.
Finally now, Justin Bieber, someone we don't often talk about in the business news, but apparently he can move the markets.
I feel like we should talk about him more in the business news, to be honest.
He's a big player.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, it certainly is when it comes to Elizabeth Arden. They saw their shares plummet more than 23% on Wall Street on Tuesday. This after new sales figures showed that celebrity fragrances, particularly those attached to Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift, weren't selling as well as they had been before. In fact, the whole company's sales were down by almost 30% over the last quarter, and they say they don't expect things to improve over the next 6 months, perhaps proving that names like Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift just don't sell fragrances anymore.
Or maybe it's a cut in pocket money. There could be something else behind this.
Exactly. Deeper levels in this crisis.
You need to research that for our next business update. Thanks very much, Stephen Carroll. Back in an hour with more business news for you. We're going to move on now, though, with a look at some of the top trends online, including A stunning video of Paris that's notching up the views. But first, some of the divided reactions to the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri.